everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So a few years ago I made a list of the worst war pictures of all time, and one of the movies featured on that list was We Were Soldiers. And I think that one of the reasons why that movie was on the list that was because at the time when I watched it and when I rewatched it 2 or 3 years after its initial release, it was a time where the reputation of United States were, being dragged through the mud because of the wars in Afghanistan and the wars in Iraq and stuff like that. And I think that my opinions were a bit colored by these events. Now when I rewatched this movie 22 years after its initial release, I find a slightly different movie that I appreciate a whole lot more. So this is a little bit more of a level-headed review than what it would have been otherwise. So let's find out how good this movie is, shall we? This is We Were Soldiers. I'm glad that they didn't have the original title that this movie was going to have, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. What a stupid title. We Were Soldiers tells the story of the first battle of the Vietnam War, the Battle of Ia Drang Valley in 1965, between US forces and NVA. And our main character is, of course, Colonel Moore, played by Mel Gibson. Gibson is very good in this movie. He's a very underrated actor in my opinion, and he is perfect as this very fatherly figure for these soldiers, and he promised that he's going to be the first one off the choppers and the last one on the chopper, when they leave a combat zone and stuff like that. We also have Sam Elliott in this movie, who is very, very grumpy because he had to shave his mustache, I guess. He's actually such a grumpy character, he almost becomes a comic relief because of his stoicism, and I found him to be quite hilarious in small little bits actually. And we also have Barry Pepper here, who's trying to wash away the stench of Battlefield Earth from his career. The majority of this movie will be spent in the valley and the battle that took place there. And this movie is much more focused on, the battle and the historical context of the Vietnam War, making it a little bit different than other Vietnam movies, and I appreciate that. I will also say this, that I love the battle sequences in this movie. They are so crisp and they are so well shot and they look so good. This is a little bit different than what you would see in a movie like Platoon, because the purpose of that was basically to be so chaotic and so irrational that you would feel like you would be in there and you wouldn't make sense of what was happening. I like the fact that we could see who was shooting at who and where they were, and that this movie wasn't edited into oblivion a la, Taken 3 or something like that. So we have a bunch of very good actors and we have a very good setting for the movie. The movie looks good. Randall Wallace, who also wrote Braveheart, is directing this one, and he does a fairly good job with it. I also like the fact that we do get some Vietnamese characters and some of the Vietnamese soldiers and how they feel about certain things, and we get to see, things from their viewpoint. I wish we could have had more of it, but we'll take what we can in this situation. So far so good. I also love the beginning of this movie where we get to see, the French phase of the Vietnam War, where a French force is annihilated by the Viet Minh forces. That was a great sequence, and it was also a good way of, capturing how the Vietnamese were fighting. But here is where the problem starts to creep in. We have some rather terrible writing that sneaks its way in every now and then. The phrase, "I am happy that I got to die for my country and tell my wife that I loved her," is uttered in the same minute. Add to that a couple of characters that is a little bit overacted, and some of the side characters do have ridiculous lines and ridiculous reactions to certain sequences and events and stuff like that. So that is a bit of a problem with this movie, and I cannot quite overlook those sequences despite the fact that, you know, the movie is very historically correct and that the movie feels very real, and several really good sequences. It prevents the movie from becoming a very, very good movie. It also annoyed me that in a movie that had so much realism and had so much historical correctness to it, that they would add sequences with slow motion and sad music and making the movie feel a bit more like a movie like, you know, The Patriot or something like that. Patriot is a great movie, but you watch it because how ridiculous it is, not how, you know, historically correct it is. Another problem this movie is saddled with is the fact that there are so many, you know, soldiers in this movie that we are following, but we never really get to know them, and they are so interchangeable that I keep forgetting who was, you know, married to some girl and who had unrealistic dreams about the future and stuff like that. This movie basically has the same problem as Black Hawk Down had. They had so many characters, but it was so difficult to remember who was who, even though I will say that Black Hawk Down is a far better movie than We Were Soldiers. In fact, I think that movie is absolutely great, but that is a story for another time. We Were Soldiers is an intense, good war picture, and while not being, you know, as good as some of the greatest when it comes to Vietnam movies, such as, you know, Apocalypse Now or Platoon or Full Metal Jacket or movies like that, it is a good movie that I really recommend. This is also a movie that tries to, you know, focus more, as I said, on the more pure war. I remember some critics being a bit mad at this movie for, you know, not showing the, you know, atrocities and, you know, what was going to come later. But that is the thing. This is, you know, the first battle. This is before the, you know, trial of the Chicago 7 and, you know, the napalming of villages and the Hanoi bombings and the fraggings and the Agent Orange and all that stuff that would come later. That is something that I can understand why people were a little bit miffed by back when this movie was released. But as I said, those things would happen later. Now, this movie, of course, has lots of cliches, and there is a couple of really, really sugar-drenched sequences before they go into battle when Mel Gibson is, you know, hanging with his family. That's a little bit too corny for me to really take serious, but if you just get past that, and if you can stomach some really awkward moments, there is a lot of good things to be had here. And if they could have focused a little bit more on the battle and built up a couple of interesting characters, and if they could have added more historical context to this movie, I think we could have talked about this as one of the best Vietnam movies. Now, it is a bit of an overlooked movie that was not very popular when it came out, but I think it has gained a lot of supporters throughout the years because of its incessantly of telling more of a historical story. Good actors, good cinematography, a pretty good pace, and a couple of jaw-droppingly awesome sequences. Is a bit held down by a couple of sequences that does not work and a lot of cliches, but for the most part I think this is a good movie that could have been a fantastic movie. I think that when I saw this movie originally, I don't think I gave it more than 16 or 17 points or something like that. But now, after some time have passed, when I can see this movie with fresh eyes, I realized that the proper rating that this movie should have is 60 points. This is a good Vietnam movie. It has some pretty awesome sequences, and as I said, it has a lot of cliches, but it is partially saved by some really good performances and a pretty damn interesting story that they're telling. And I feel like we're getting the true story of the battle between the Vietnamese and the 7th Cavalry. So take that for what it is. I think this movie is good. I think this movie could have been even better. So see you next time for Well So and So Reviewing. Well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.